Minister, thank you very much, and a wide-ranging presentation, and certainly pushing some of the buttons that delegates at this conference have been concerned about, particularly around the issue of STEM skills, the role that education plays. You've concentrated your comments particularly at early schooling education and so on, and we have been very pleased to have heard the government's priorities in those areas. Delegates, it's up to you now, please. Questions? I have one over here, first of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. My name is Peter Hoy from the University of Queensland. I was recently in Berlin where I met with the director of the Helmholtz Foundation, and he told me about a program they have in Germany called Kleine Forscher, or Little Researcher. And they're now, according to him, signed up 25,000 out of 40,000 kindergartens in Germany to try to introduce the kids to STEM very early. And I just wonder what the plans are in government to actually articulate even further down to expand on your great vision for getting better education.
Well, thank you, Peter, and it's good to see you here at the CEDA conference. I'm sure University of Queensland's teacher courses won't have any difficulty being reaccredited. Well, I think that's a very good point, that we want to, as a government, ensure that the focus on national priorities starts as early as possible. So I would like to give some praise to the previous government. They did fund 15 hours minimum universal access to preschool when they were in government, starting in about 2008. And while they didn't actually provide for ongoing funding beyond this year, and that beyond last year, so they saw it as a 5 or 6 year program, this government has extended that funding and in fact has announced funding into the future for 2 years to coincide with when the Federation White Paper will be finally wrapped up, and then we'll know how we'll proceed beyond that. That's $840 million, but what it does, which is really important, is it means that every 4-year-old in Australia has the opportunity for 15 hours of minimum schooling, effectively, whether it's in kindergarten, as it is in South Australia, for example, which was an early mover on kindergarten in the 1950s, through to childcare, as it tends to be in New South Wales. They tend to deliver that in long day childcare. But interestingly, in some, for example, in Tasmania, in 2008, 6% of Tasmanian 4-year-olds were in 15 hours of preschool. Today it's 97%. In Queensland it was 0%. Now it's about 98%. So what we're seeing is a massive increase in the number of 4-year-olds in a organised, structured education setting for at least 15 hours a week at the age of 4. And that gives us the opportunity to do exactly the kind of program that you're talking about, which is to introduce STEM very early in a child's education. And this is vitally important for Australia, not just from a point of view of our productivity and our workforce, which I know is one of CEDA's priorities, but in terms of our competition with other countries around the world. South Korea, for example, are now starting children at school at the age of 3. So you could effectively say we're starting children at the school age of 4, if you include preschool, and I think you should. And of course, childcare today is very different to childcare 10 years ago in Australia. Childcare is not a babysitting program. It is an education program, and that's what parents expect, and that's what is being delivered in Australia. So I see all of these elements working together, and if we can roll out a STEM program at the age of 4, then we should do so. And happy to look at what the Germans do, because they tend to be very good at these kinds of, they tend to be the gold standard, in fact, when it comes to STEM.
I have time for one more question. I think the Minister has to get away to a party meeting. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Pyne. Matthew Knott from the Sydney Morning Herald.
You ask me a question all the time. Somebody else.
I'm sure they'd be interested. We've had quite a bit of discussion over the past few days about the Federation White Paper process and the leaked Green Paper. Now, two of the ideas in that are for the federal government to totally get out of funding all schools, or secondly, for the federal government to only fund independent schools and not public schools? Are you open to those ideas? Would there be any advantages to doing it that way rather than the way we fund schools now?
Well, Matthew, the purpose of a green paper followed by a white paper is to have a wide-ranging discussion about issues that are important. And obviously in the schools area, we have developed over many decades a quite complicated system of who is responsible for what, or in fact who is not responsible for particularly difficult issues. So I welcome a discussion in the green paper and white paper process. I'm sorry that it was leaked to you on Sunday and that you wrote about it on Sunday and Monday, because it required the government to use some nimble footwork yesterday to deal with one particular issue. But you know, it would be wrong of me to preempt that discussion over the course of the coming months, for the very reason that it would truncate the discussion process. So let's see what comes of the green paper. There are many options in the green paper about what governments could do. And obviously, 3 of those options are the Commonwealth could be entirely involved in schools and take them over and fund them all and run them. We could do what the Federation envisaged, which is to have no Commonwealth involvement in schools. Or we could have the current system, which is a hybrid model where the Commonwealth is majority responsible for the funding of non-government schools, and the states have majority responsibility for the funding of government schools. And that's the way we've developed since the Goulburn incident in 1962. And we could keep the national responsibilities or priorities that I talked about in my speech around a curriculum and NAPLAN and testing, as we are doing. And filling in the gaps, as we're also doing. I didn't talk about explicit direct instruction in remote Indigenous schools today, because there's so much we could talk about. Didn't talk about support for children with disabilities or learning difficulties, which I could have also talked about, because I thought the speech was long enough as it was. But I mean, that's the third model, and that's the current model we have. So let's see where the discussion takes us, and I'm not giving you any more exclusives. Not that I gave you that exclusive, by the way.
Colleagues, I think that's an appropriate time to draw the discussion to a conclusion with the Minister.